Our next speaker is Dr. DeGioia, the President, DeGioia, sorry, I got it wrong again, who has served Georgetown University for nearly a quarter century now. To prepare young people for leadership roles in the global community, Dr. DeGioia has expanded opportunities for intercultural and interreligious dialogue, welcomed world leaders to campus, and convened international conferences to address many challenging issues. He is now planning to convene an international conference to continue the dialogue that we are having here, hopefully in March of 2009 and probably even beyond. Dr. DeGioia is the first lay president of a Jesuit university. As such, he places special emphasis on sustaining Georgetown's Catholic and Jesuit identity and its responsibility to serve as a voice and an instrument for justice. He has also been a strong advocate for interreligious dialogue. He is a member of the Order of Malta, a lay religious order of the Roman Catholic Church dedicated to serving the sick and the poor. Dr. DeGioia.
Well, I wish to extend my sincere appreciation to His Royal Highness Prince Ghazi, to Dean Attridge, to Professor Miroslav Volf, and to Reverend Joseph Cumming for our days here together and for this unforgettable experience to deepen our understanding between and among our religious traditions. And I wish to express my further appreciation to all of you for your presentations, your comments, your questions, and for your friendship. I offer my brief reflections this morning from the perspective of a life lived within a university, a Catholic and Jesuit university, in fact, the oldest Catholic university in the United States, founded in 1789, just a few months before the founding of this republic. Georgetown was founded in a state, Maryland, that as a colony was known for its commitment to religious freedom. It was to be Catholic, but open, quote, to students of every religious profession, close quote, our founding documents. And to this day, we have fostered a respect for pluralism and for a commitment to interfaith understanding. Because of a background of more than 3 decades in this university, my comments this morning will reflect a sense of urgency regarding how we move forward beyond dialogue into ways of preparing our young people for lives in which they will be expected to go out and make a difference in the world. I'd like to offer some thoughts of how we might be able to build from our conversation, our dialogue, about how we might move from a common word to some common work. I'd like to offer some suggestions for a new kind of engagement together in the world. And I think you'll see and find in these reflections a very strong resonance with the comments that have been made by many of you over the course of these days. I think for those who work out of the perspective of a university, it is important to step back and reflect for a moment on just how significant it is that we're having this meeting here at Yale University. Professor Volf, in his opening comments on Tuesday, described this moment as one in which the world, particularly the West, is going through a period of desecularization. If we step back a generation, I think we'd agree that such a meeting as this would have been unthinkable when a religious perspective was not viewed as an appropriate framework for intellectual engagement within the university. So what is it about this moment that enables this meeting now? and why is it so significant? On Monday night, Senator Kerry quoted the contemporary novelist Michael Chabon. Who would like to go back and start the 21st century over again? This is a new century, and from the perspective of the academy, if we look back at previous centuries, there were two dominant strains of intellectual engagement: naturalistic epistemology, the methodologies of the natural sciences, and a historicism that dominated in both the social sciences and humanities. Both of these methodologies, the methodologies of the natural sciences and of historicism, severely undermined confidence in religious belief. The secularization that began in the 18th and 19th centuries, coming out of the Enlightenment, pushed religion further and further away from the acceptable terms for intellectual inquiry in the 20th century. In this same century in which the authority of religion in the West continued to be undermined, 170 million people died at the hands of their own governments throughout our world. Now, I'd like to offer three proposals for how we might be able to move to a common work, for I believe there is work we can do together. The first focuses within the academy. I just stated that 170 million people died at the hands of their governments. For half of the century in which this occurred, we lived under what political scientists would call a growing regime of human rights. This year is the 60th anniversary of the ratification of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Now think of the incoherence. A 1948 agreement of all of the nations of the world to a set of universal human rights, and tens of millions dead, billions more dying from chronic poverty within that same time frame. We have a crisis within the regime of human rights. Now, we could discuss at length the nature of this crisis, but at its core may be the question of how one might justify a belief in universal human rights. In the process of drafting the Declaration, much time and effort went into the question of justification. What arguments can we provide to justify our claim for these universal rights? Jacques Maritain took on a special role for UNESCO in engaging in a survey of the greatest thinkers of the world of what are the strongest arguments that could be developed to justify the claims for these universal rights. In the end, as you know, the document is silent on the issue. Why? Marianne Glendon recalls in her story about the drafting of the Universal Declaration, Maritain liked to tell the story of how a visitor at one meeting expressed astonishment that champions of violently opposed ideologies had been able to agree on a list of fundamental rights. The man was told, "Yes, we agree about the rights, but on condition no one asks why." Now, recently, some contemporary scholars like Michael Perry have argued that the language of justification always turns on the acknowledgement of the sacredness of human life. Perry argues that it is only the language of faith that provides us with the resources for justifying claims for human rights. The idea of human rights is ineliminably religious, he writes. That is, a fundamental constituent of the idea is the conviction that every human being is sacred, that every human being is inviolable, has inherent dignity and is an end in him or herself. These kinds of convictions, these kinds of claims are inescapably religious. So if we have a crisis in human rights, that 60 years into this regime, we still confront our failure to prevent the atrocities of Rwanda, Darfur, and Srebrenica, and if justification requires the language and the logic of the sacred, it could be that an invaluable contribution of Muslims, Christians, and Jews together in interfaith dialogue is to focus our conversation on our distinctive approaches to justify the claims for universal human rights. This is an example in this new century of how together we can bring the resources of our religious traditions to bear on the intellectual challenges that define this moment. We have a new role to play as part of the desecularization of our age. Second, if the last century provided a new regime of human rights, perhaps this century could bring into being a regime of human development. The very idea that we could take on anything so ambitious as the Millennium Development Goals, this too represents a new moment. And many of our colleagues over these last few days have focused on the significance of this moment. But remember, it was only in 1990 that the first UN Development Report was ever issued. The logic behind that report, a logic developed by people like Amartya Sen and Martha Nussbaum, moves us into a recognition of the need to build the capacities, the capabilities of every human being in ways that will enable each person to flourish, and also the need to create the opportunities for these capabilities to be developed. An extraordinary framework for how such a regime could come into place is provided by a group of reports of this decade, the Arab Human Development Reports, which were published between 2002 and 2005. These reports recognize the urgent needs that we face as a human community. 65 million Arabs are illiterate, 2/3 of whom are women. 10 million children between ages 6 and 15 of age are currently out of school. If current trends persist, the numbers will increase by 40% by 2015. Only 0.6% of the population uses the internet. 15% are unemployed, and no generation of young Arabs has been as large as today. 100 million new jobs will be required in the region by 2020. We can't miss this moment. Right now, we have an opportunity in our lifetimes to create a new framework, a new understanding of our responsibilities to one another. The Arab Human Development Reports provide an unprecedented roadmap for human development. This is an extraordinary moment. Let's ensure that when future generations look back on this moment, they will find a people who grasped this moment and established a new framework of responsibility for one another. And finally, can we have the opportunities to be together in rooms like this? Can we truly touch our people and share with them the important insights that we have learned through our work together in ways that make their lives more meaningful and provide a greater chance for security in each of their lives? The most common concern raised in every one of these gatherings that I've had the privilege to participate over the last many years, and it's come up in several comments over the course of these days, is always, how do we connect our understanding, developed and deepened by the conversations that take place here, through the trust that is built here with those who will never have these opportunities, but who instead confront day-to-day realities shaped by mistrust, resentment, misunderstanding, threats of violence, and confusion. Can our universities and schools, our churches and mosques, begin the process of preparing the next generations to go out and share, to connect with people in need of the perspective that can make their lives that much more meaningful and provide a greater framework for human security? This is not just an idealistic affirmation of the obvious. It's an urgent necessity. We do not know each other. Our people do not know each other. Look at some of the findings of DeGioia Mugahead's research. 44% of Americans say Muslims are too extreme in their religious beliefs. Nearly 1/4 of Americans say they would not want a Muslim as a neighbor. 32% say they admire nothing about the Muslim world. A majority say they know nothing or not much about the opinions and beliefs of people who live in the Muslim world. And yet, the more Americans report knowing about Muslim countries, the more likely they are to hold positive views of those countries. I could keep going, providing further insights that DeGioia uncovered that support the point that we really don't know each other. The moral challenge for us: can we prepare our young people to come to know one another? They share so much culture, music, film, fashion. Can we provide them with the skills and the abilities that they will need to engage with one another and to come to understand one another at ever deeper levels? So 3 thoughts. First, can together we ensure that the resources of our religious traditions are brought into discourse on the intellectual challenges that we face, where previously our traditions were not deemed relevant? An example, the question of the justification of human rights. Second, can we bring into this new century the regime of human development, a recognition of the need to develop the promise, the capabilities, the capacities, and the opportunities of all of our people? And third, can we create new frameworks in which the vast diversity of people who identify with a religious tradition are called to engage with one another? Can we come to know one another? Can we prepare our young people to go out to be embodiments of hope, embodiments of love, and instruments of justice? And the answer to these questions, I believe we will find our call to action. Thank you.